Her name was Alyssa Monroe, 32 years old, a woman who, to anyone who knew her, seemed like the very definition of calm, collected, and professional. She was the kind of person who always showed up early, always dressed immaculately, and always had a warm but firm presence that commanded respect. But none of that mattered the day she was pulled over. It was a warm Thursday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina. Alyssa had just left her office and was driving home, humming to the radio, when she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought nothing of it. Police cars sped past her all the time on her way home. But this time, they didn't pass. They stayed behind her. A voice crackled through the loudspeaker. "Driver, pull over, now!" Confused, Alyssa did as she was told, easing her black Honda Accord onto the side of the road. She rolled down her window, hands firmly placed on the steering wheel, every safety measure she'd learned to take as a black woman in America when interacting with police. Two officers approached, both white, both stone-faced. "License and registration," one demanded without so much as a greeting. Alyssa complied immediately. "Of course, officer," she said softly, sliding the documents toward him. The officer barely glanced at them before motioning for her to step out of the vehicle. "Excuse me?" Alyssa asked, her voice wavering. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," the officer repeated, firmer this time. Her heart began to race. She had no idea what was happening, but she also knew better than to argue. With trembling hands, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped onto the pavement. That's when it happened. Without explanation, without reading her any rights, and without showing a single shred of evidence, the officers spun her around, yanked her wrists behind her back, and slapped handcuffs onto them. "Wait, what's going on?" Alyssa pleaded. "You're under arrest," one of the officers muttered. "For what?" But they didn't answer. Instead, they shoved her toward the back seat of the squad car as if she were some dangerous criminal. Her mind spun. She had no weapons, no drugs, no contraband. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't run a light, hadn't done anything to even warrant a traffic stop. She was an ordinary woman, just trying to make it home from work. And yet, here she was, humiliated, restrained, and being driven away like a suspect. But what stunned everyone later wasn't just that she had been arrested without proof. It was who she really was, and the job title that would leave the entire community speechless. He drive to the precinct felt endless. Alyssa sat in the back of the squad car, her wrists aching from the tight metal cuffs digging into her skin. Every time she shifted to relieve the pressure, the officer in the passenger seat shot her a sharp glance in the mirror. She wanted to ask again what she was being accused of, but something in their body language told her it wouldn't matter. They weren't listening. Not to her. When they arrived, the officers pulled her out of the car and marched her through the station. Heads turned as other officers and even civilians in the lobby looked on. Some frowned, some whispered. To them, she was just another suspect. They led her into a holding room and sat her down in a hard metal chair. One of the officers stood guard by the door while the other began typing at a computer. Finally, Alyssa found the courage to ask, "Can someone please explain why I'm here?" The officer didn't look up. "You fit the description." Her stomach dropped. She had heard those words before, those vague, dangerous words that had been used as justification for countless wrongful arrests and worse. "Description of who?" she asked, her voice trembling. The officer's jaw tightened. "We'll get to that. For now, sit tight." Hours passed. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and her belongings taken. Each step felt more surreal than the last. Alyssa wasn't a criminal. She wasn't even the type of person who had so much as a parking ticket. And yet here she was, processed into the system like she was guilty of something she didn't even understand. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, word was spreading. A bystander who had filmed her arrest had posted the video online. The caption read, Cops arrest black woman without saying why. She kept asking, they never answered. Within hours, the clip gained thousands of views. Comments flooded in. Here we go again. Another innocent person being treated like a criminal for no reason. This makes me sick. Where's the proof? She handled herself so calmly. Who is she? The world didn't know it yet, but that last question would change everything. Back inside, Alyssa was finally led to a small interrogation room. 2 detectives entered, older, more seasoned than the officers who had arrested her. One dropped a thick file onto the table with a loud thud. "Miss Monroe," he began, "you were picked up today because we believe you're connected to a series of fraud cases involving stolen identities." Alyssa blinked. "Fraud? That's impossible. I've never stolen anything in my life." The detective leaned in, studying her face. "Then maybe you can explain why multiple witnesses say a woman matching your description was seen using stolen credit cards across the city." Alyssa's hands shook. "Matching my description? That could be anyone. Do you have actual proof? A video? A photo?" The room fell silent. The detectives exchanged glances but offered nothing. That silence told Alyssa everything she needed to know. They had nothing. No hard evidence, no clear connection, just a vague description. And yet here she was, sitting in handcuffs, treated like a criminal. Her chest tightened with anger and fear. But deep inside, she also knew something they didn't. Something that, once revealed, would flip this entire situation upside down. Because Alyssa Monroe wasn't just anybody. She held a title, one she had earned through years of sacrifice, education, and determination. A title that demanded respect. A title that, when spoken aloud, would leave the entire precinct stunned into silence. But for now, Alyssa kept quiet. She wanted to see just how far they were willing to go with this injustice before she showed them exactly who they had put behind bars. Meanwhile, Alyssa's family had no idea where she was. Her younger brother, Marcus Monroe, had been expecting her for dinner that evening. When she didn't show and didn't answer her phone, he grew worried. He tried calling again, straight to voicemail. By 9 p.m., Marcus checked social media, and that's when he saw it, the viral video. His heart dropped as he realized the woman being arrested in the grainy footage was his sister. Within minutes, he was on the phone, calling every contact he had, trying to figure out where she'd been taken. By midnight, he was banging on the doors of the precinct, demanding answers. But the officers at the front desk only gave him the runaround. "Sir, calm down." "Sir, you need to wait." "Sir, your sister is being processed." Processed for what? They wouldn't say. And that was the scariest part. Inside her cell that night, Alyssa lay on the hard cot, staring at the ceiling. Every muscle in her body ached, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. How many other people had been through this? How many had been stripped of dignity, freedom, and safety, without proof, without justice? And the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Because Alyssa wasn't just an ordinary woman. She was someone whose very job was supposed to put her on the other side of this equation. The irony was almost too much to bear. Morning sunlight crept through the tiny barred window of Alyssa's cell, but it brought her no comfort. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, flashes of the arrest replayed, her hands forced behind her back, the cold metal of the cuffs, the stares of strangers as if she were guilty before she'd even spoken. The cell door clanged open. A female officer handed her a tray of breakfast, watery eggs, burnt toast, and a cup of lukewarm coffee. Alyssa pushed the tray aside. She had no appetite. What she wanted was answers. And then finally, she got her chance. The detectives returned, file in hand. This time they looked tired, even frustrated. "Miss Monroe," one began. "We've been reviewing the evidence." He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "And it doesn't add up." Alyssa leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Because you have no evidence. Because I don't belong here." The detective sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, we had multiple tips about a woman running fraud scams. Similar height, build, hairstyle. The arresting officers thought you were her." "Thought?" Alyssa snapped. "You destroyed my life last night because someone thought I looked like a criminal?" The room went quiet. And that's when Alyssa decided she'd had enough. She sat up straighter, her tone calm but firm. "You should know something before you say another word. My name is Alyssa Monroe. I am a licensed attorney with the State Bar of North Carolina. I specialize in criminal defense." The words hung in the air like a bomb. The detectives froze. One blinked rapidly as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "Wait, you're a lawyer?" "Yes," Alyssa said coldly. "And not just any lawyer. I have spent the last 8 years defending clients against exactly this kind of injustice. Arrests without proof, accusations without evidence, lives ruined because of sloppy police work and racial profiling." Silence. The weight of her title pressed against the walls of that interrogation room. The very system that should have recognized her as an officer of the court had instead treated her like a criminal. The detective's face reddened. He muttered something under his breath, closed the file, and stood. "We'll sort this out." But Alyssa wasn't finished. "Oh, you'll do more than sort it out," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "You'll explain why I was cuffed and dragged here without being read my rights. You'll explain why I was fingerprinted and locked in a cell for a crime I didn't commit. And then you'll explain it to my colleagues, my firm, and the state bar. Because believe me, this isn't going away." For the first time since the ordeal began, Alyssa felt the power shift. Word of her job title spread quickly. By noon, local news stations were running the headline, "Black woman arrested without proof, turns out to be defense attorney." The story exploded. On social media, the video of her arrest, now paired with the revelation of who she was, went viral. Comments poured in, "A defense lawyer? Oh, the irony. She's been fighting for others and now she's living it herself. This is bigger than one mistake. It shows how dangerous false arrests can be." Imagine if she hadn't been a lawyer. Who would have believed her then? The community was outraged. Civil rights groups issued statements condemning the arrest. Activists organized protests outside the precinct, demanding accountability. And Alyssa's younger brother, Marcus, stood at the front of the crowd, holding a sign that read, "Proof before arrest, justice for Alyssa." Back at the station, the higher-ups scrambled. The chief of police called an emergency press conference, insisting it had been a misunderstanding. But the public wasn't buying it, because it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a window into a system that too often acted first and asked questions later, especially when it came to people who looked like Alyssa. And Alyssa knew it, which is why, instead of quietly accepting an apology, she prepared to fight back. When she finally walked out of the precinct, released without charges, cameras flashed. Microphones crowded around her. Reporters shouted questions. Alyssa stopped, her face calm but her voice unwavering. "I was arrested yesterday without evidence, without explanation, and without respect for my basic rights. This could happen to anyone. The only difference is I happen to be an attorney who understands the law. But what about the countless people who don't? What happens to them?" Her words struck like lightning. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every person who had been handcuffed without cause, every life upended by suspicion instead of proof. And in that moment, Alyssa Monroe went from victim to voice. But her fight was only beginning. The days that followed Alyssa's release were a blur of interviews, phone calls, and meetings with her legal team. The story had already spread far beyond Charlotte, picked up by national outlets, debated on talk shows, and dissected across social media. Everywhere she turned, someone had an opinion. Some people praised her courage for speaking out. Others dismissed her as overreacting, and a small but loud group claimed the police had simply made an honest mistake. But Alyssa knew better. This wasn't about a mistake. This was about a system. One that had seen her skin color first, her humanity second, and her profession last. On Monday morning, Alyssa stood outside the courthouse with Marcus at her side. Dozens of reporters gathered as she announced her next step. "I will be filing a lawsuit against the Charlotte Police Department for wrongful arrest, violation of my civil rights, and racial profiling. This is not just for me. It is for every person who has been silenced, ignored, or mistreated by a justice system that promises fairness but delivers prejudice." Cameras flashed. The crowd erupted. But Alyssa wasn't finished. She also filed a formal complaint with the State Bar Association, requesting an independent review of police conduct in wrongful arrest cases. If successful, the review could lead to statewide reforms. This was no longer about one arrest. It was about changing the way justice was served in her community. Behind the scenes, however, Alyssa was struggling. At night, when the cameras were gone and the crowds dispersed, she lay awake replaying the ordeal. The cold click of handcuffs, the officer's blank stares, the humiliation of sitting in that cell. For the first time in her career, she truly felt what so many of her clients had tried to explain to her in the past. That crushing sense of powerlessness, of being treated as guilty before you could even speak. She had always believed them. But now she knew, and that knowledge weighed heavily on her. Marcus noticed the change. One evening, as they sat together in her apartment, he said softly, "You've been quiet lately." Alyssa stared at the window, the city lights flickering outside. "I keep thinking about the people who don't have a voice, Marcus. The ones who sit in cells for weeks, months, years, because no one believes them. Because they don't have the resources or the platform I do. If this could happen to me, what chance do they have?" Marcus reached for her hand. "Then maybe this is your chance to change things, not just in the courtroom, out here too." And that's exactly what Alyssa did. In the months that followed, she became a leading voice for criminal justice reform in her city. She organized workshops to educate citizens about their rights during police encounters. She launched a nonprofit to provide free legal aid for those wrongfully arrested. And she began speaking at universities, churches, and community centers, telling her story, not to dwell on her pain, but to ignite change. Her message was simple: proof before arrest, evidence before accusation, justice before judgment. The lawsuit dragged on for nearly a year, but when it finally reached settlement, the outcome made headlines once again. The police department admitted to procedural failures, paid Alyssa a significant settlement, and, most importantly, agreed to implement new training protocols to reduce bias in arrests. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a start. And for Alyssa, it was proof that standing up, even in the face of humiliation and fear, could make a difference. Looking back, Alyssa often thought about that night in the cell, about how close she came to being just another forgotten statistic. The only thing that saved her in the end was her job title, the fact that she was a defense attorney who knew the law, who had the resources and courage to fight back. But what haunted her most was the question, what if she hadn't been? What if she had been a waitress, a cashier, a teacher, a nurse? Someone without the same platform, without the same knowledge of the system. Would anyone have believed her? Would anyone have cared? The uncomfortable truth was probably not, and that truth is why her story matters. Alyssa Monroe's arrest was not just an isolated event. It was a mirror held up to society, reflecting uncomfortable realities about race, power, and justice. It was a reminder that freedom can be fragile, that dignity can be stripped in seconds, and that innocent until proven guilty doesn't always apply equally. But it was also proof of something else. That one voice, when raised at the right time, can spark a movement. So the next time you see flashing lights in your rearview mirror or read a headline about another mistaken arrest, remember Alyssa's story. Remember the woman who was handcuffed without proof. Remember the defense attorney who turned her own injustice into a call for change. And then ask yourself, if this happened to you or someone you love, would the system protect you or fail you? What do you think? Was this just a case of mistaken identity, or was it evidence of a deeper problem within the justice system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. And if you found Alyssa's story powerful, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We share more stories like this, true, raw, and unforgettable, so you never miss the next one.